Vacation starts with VA. Whether you're feeling beachy, mountainy, or every E in between, you'll find all that you love all in one trip to Virginia. Start yours at virginia.org.
Here in America, work is in trouble. We've offshored our manufacturing, sent away good jobs, and lost so much ability to make things. American Giant is a company that's pushing back against this tide. They make high-quality clothing, sweatshirts, jeans, dresses, jackets, and so much more, right here in the USA. Visit American-Giant.com and get 20% off your first order when you use code STAPLE20 at checkout. That's 20% off your first order at American-Giant.com, promo code STAPLE20.
With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Welcome back to Heard Tell. I'm excited about this one. We wanted to talk Mike Pence, so we got the guy that wrote the book on it. Literally, in this case, he's got a book out, Piety and Power. He wrote the book on Mike Pence. We're going to talk Mike Pence. Tom LoBianco, he is a political reporter with Yahoo News. Good guy. Comes highly recommended from our mutual friend, Eric Garcia, so we'll say hi to him. How are you, my friend? Appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, man. Excited to be here.
Joining us from an undisclosed moving location because he's a busy man, but that's okay. Tom, take us back because a lot of people didn't know who Mike Pence was pre-Trump, so all they know is Trump-era Pence.
Yeah.
That's not the Indiana Pence. Take us back to Indianapolis. Take us back to Indiana.
Yeah.
Who is Mike Pence and where did he come from?
Oh, boy. Great question. You know, when I wrote the book, and I was, doing my research, and I'll just, quick backgrounder on me. I've been covering Mike Pence for 11 years. I get this question now occasionally. They're like, why did you pick Mike Pence to cover, the world's most boring politician? And the short answer is I didn't exactly pick him to cover. I was on contract with the AP covering the State House back in 2011. Well, so Mike Pence, when I was covering him, I always underestimated him. And we also had a bigger race out there too. It's Dick Lugar Senate race going on back in 2012. And I focused more there because that's where more of the action was. But what I found with Mike Pence, as I was doing the research for this book, the more that I covered him, and the more I saw him in a different light, the more that I saw him, in a Washington light as well as an Indiana light, I stopped underestimating him. So a couple things to know on Pence, which I think we in the press sometimes miss, and there's a reason that we miss him. And I also think it's purposeful too. I mean, he's a very calculated politician, even at this moment. Is you don't have to be exciting to be successful sometimes. You have to know your audience. And I've noticed that this week in particular, we're coming off of the Trump-Pence showdown, the return to DC, in particular for Trump, since, for the first time since January 6th. I think this was Pence's second trip back to DC since then. I think he did a Heritage Foundation event last summer. And I see a lot of the coverage saying, come on, Mike, you missed your moment. This was the pictures of the guy who was sitting in the loading dock, calling in the National Guard, calling in the military to put down what by all accounts what appears to have been the first attempted coup, federal coup in American history. Where's that guy? Where's Mr. Take Charge? And I've struggled with that. And I get that question a lot. And I think the answer is in his past. And the answer is in his communications and knowing your audience. Because that's not what sells with the Republican voters that he's going for right now. So what does sell? He obviously seems to think that steady sells. And that comes from how he came up in politics. He's a very steady, disciplined, methodical, painfully slow, traditionally painfully indecisive politician. That's how he was as governor, at least. it comes from the way he's done things. He put in a lot of elbow grease to get to politics. He didn't start that way. It didn't run in his family. He kind of found his way to that. Mike Pence was born in 1959 down in Columbus, Indiana. His family had just moved there from Chicago. Father was a regional oil salesman for Keel Brothers Oil Company, and the family had 4 boys in succession, and then they had 2 girls. His 2 younger sisters about 12 years later. So it's almost like, in terms of the staggering of the siblings, it's almost like 2 families, because the age difference, 12 years. It kind of captures the way Pence does a lot of politics. He's very good at morphing. He's very good at changing to meet the moment. The chameleon, more so than other politicians. Every politician is effectively a chameleon, because there's a good reason for that. I mean, if you are being representative, theoretically, that these changes that reflects changing opinions. Almost a very benevolent reading of things. Let's put it that way. So Mike Pence is very good at changing. One of the things that he does to cover for that a little bit is he glosses the truth a little bit. And, not like Trump. Trump just lies. Pence has traditionally been better at traditional political spin, which itself is not great. He would always say on the campaign trail, "I'm just a kid. I'm a kid. I grew up in a small town in southern Indiana with a cornfield in my backyard." And that was one of his lines. And I remember thinking, I saw Columbus. The first time I saw Columbus, Indiana, it reminded me of Frederick, Maryland, a really nice, small to mid-sized city. It's not huge. It's not New York. It's not LA. It's not, good-sized city like Baltimore, wherever. But it's also a city. And it's not, it's not a one-stop town. Okay. And I remember he would say that, and I'm like, well, this doesn't really seem to grab your roots. I mean, that was my thinking, at least. And I remember I was driving down there I was doing some research, and I was driving around Columbus from former neighbors of his, and they were helping me out, giving me a little tour. And we go to his house, the second house they lived in, this Rambler, and lo and behold, there was a cornfield behind that house, and I was gobsmacked. I just couldn't believe it. I was like, wait a minute, there's actually corn here? And I was like, well, why is there corn? And the answer, fittingly enough, was because Pence's family was doing so well, and good for them, that's what you want, that they kept on moving into the newest subdivision of Columbus as it grew further and further into the cornfields. So the city cut into the cornfields, they cut with it. They kept on bumping into the cornfield. And they did okay. They had money. His family, they owned multiple Marathon gas stations. His father sold them off in the 80s and gave each of the kids a payout from that, about $1 million each. And Pence, when he started out, it's one of the best observations I've heard from folks that know him is that he's very dutiful. He's very orderly and methodical. And you can actually see that in the way he comes up. He attends a Catholic middle school, Catholic grade school down there in Columbus, St. Columba, and then transfers into Columbus North, the big public school later, in the late 70s, mid late 70s. And his debate teacher back then, his coach and teacher in middle school, I always talk about how wonderful he was at remembering things, and wonderful he was at understanding and grabbing the details and repeating them back. And anybody who's listened to a Mike Pence speech, and they're not exciting. And I've been listening to them for 11 years. They have not changed an awful lot. Knows that he's very good at repeating things back almost verbatim. So that's kind of like how he approaches a lot of things. He's very directed. And looking, not getting too far ahead of ourselves here, you actually saw that on January 6th. And again, you actually see that in the title of his memoir that's coming out. So help me God. It's a reference to his duty to the oath of office. It's the same thing that his top advisor said in January 6th hearings. Mark Short, he chose his loyalty and his duty to the Constitution over his loyalty and his duty to one man, Donald Trump. And I found a trend in his history where influential people would kind of push him in a direction. One of those is a guy named George M. Curtis III. That's kind of is a history teacher for him, and at Hanover College in the late 70s, 1980 into 81, I think. This is, he writes this thesis for him, an undergraduate, called "It's the Religious Expressions of Abraham Lincoln." And it's about Abraham Lincoln struggling with how do you match faith with the practice of politics. And you read that, and what I heard at least is you hear Mike Pence struggling with that. It's really fascinating. It's also kind of hard to find. They put them under copyright down at the Hanover Library. And you see Pence internalizing things. That's the way I read it. It's 37 pages, and again, great research. He's kind of internalizing this stuff, and it's when he's going through his own change. He's grown up, he's been raised Catholic. Of course, Catholics highly dogmatic, and LoBianco, I get that. But he does start this conversion to evangelical, or some kind of, non-denominational Christian in college. He has what he later determines to be a salvation experience. 1978, the Ichthus Music Festival in Wilmore, Kentucky. He feels Jesus there. I've heard he's given different versions of this, and I don't think it's because he's lying or anything. I think it's just, memory doesn't always serve. And, sometimes it's an altar call where he feels that. Sometimes he's standing in the rain. Sometimes he's sitting in the rain. But, 1978, this is his conversion. This is his salvation experience. He doesn't leave the church. He doesn't leave the Catholic Church until 1994, 16 years later. They're all kind of benchmarks along the way that you can use to see this. Him and his wife meet at the Catholic Church, St. Thomas Aquinas, up in right near Broad Ripple in downtown Indianapolis. They get married in the Catholic Church in 1986, 3 years later, over near the Indy Motor Speedway. And for a period of time, they call themselves evangelical Catholics. Going back to this point about people pushing Mike Pence, Karen Pence is the one who really kind of focuses him, kind of puts the blinders on him and gives him some direction, because he's always been interested in politics, in philosophy, in history. By now, gets him moving in towards like kind of classical liberal conservatism. He votes for Jimmy Carter in 1980 because he's the evangelical in that race. But he later says that he sides with Reagan after that. And Karen Pence does something similar. You see that after they get married, Pence gets more concerned about actually practicing politics, and he starts running into a race for Congress, 1988. Runs again a second time in 1990. And I always thought that these two races, 1988 congressional race and the 1990 congressional race, to me, were always very telling of who the actual Mike Pence is. Before he's really put on the mask, before he's, really started, becoming stiff and, politician, he's more open back then. And, he's young, he's green. And he's very, he follows the rules. Well, I'll give you two examples of this. He starts a machine politics. It's the Dick Lugar political machine in Indianapolis. And we always think of Democrat machine politics. Well, Republicans are, political operatives too. Like, it wouldn't be so shocking they would have machine politics. And in Indiana, in Indianapolis back then, in the 60s and the 70s, the guy named Keith Buellin and his protege, Dick Lugar, build this machine, a powerful Republican machine. And Pence, is a young up and coming operative, gets in on the ground floor with them. And they say, you know what? We got this race for you. There's this guy we've been trying to get rid of. He's a teacher at Ball State University. He's a Democrat. He keeps on winning. We don't think that he represents the district. Why don't you run? Initially Mike Pence had been thinking, I'm going to have to run for, like city county council or, like state house or something, and then run for Congress. These guys are just like, well, just run for Congress, man. Like nobody else wants to do it because this guy keeps on cleaning our clock. and he does. So he follows their instructions. The next set of instructions he follows is the Newt Gingrich campaign school. Okay. He flies to DC in 1987. And he goes and he does the training at it's the RNC and the NRCC. It's kind of, the Lee Atwater, Newt Gingrich part of this too. The guy who's kind of hands-on guy, the former aide and advisor to Gingrich's name is Joe Gaylord. And they teach you how to run a challengers campaign against these many Democrats. This is a precursor to the 94 Gingrich wave. And, I found the book. I actually bought the guide on eBay, the training manual that they used. It's Flying Upside Down, the incumbents, the challengers' guide to defeating incumbents. And guess what that calls for? It calls for tarring and, just muddying up your opponent. Smash mouth politics. And guess what? Pence does it. They run the ads. They run they does that in the first race, 1988. And he comes miraculously, it seems, within 6 points of upending this long-term congressman. And they're very, inspired by that. So they keep running into the next one, and they go even nastier. There's this famous advertisement in Pence lore, and people in Indiana politics know about this. Obviously nationally, more people are learning about this. The shorthand is called the Arab ad, because this is where he's losing this race terribly from the second go around in 1990, and he kind of throws up a Hail Mary. It's like the dirtiest ad you could think of. There's a white guy dressed up as a Arab oil sheik. Throws on aviator shades and looks like something out like with a Clash, like Rock the Casbah. Like something like that. And I knew some of the guys that helped him on this and helped him on those races back then. Talking with me for this, and he said, even at one point, Pence, when he's coming up for this thing, he's writing the script for this thing. He thought it was going to be funny. He thought it was going to be amusing, like an amusing attack on his opponent. The attack was that my opponent supports foreign oil. We need to get off foreign oil. It has the ideas that this the quote unquote Arab oil sheik, then thanks Pence's political opponent for sending so much money overseas from Indiana to to the Saudis. And Pence, when he's writing the initial draft of this thing, he wanted to have the guy have two pairs of aviator shades on, so that when he goes to take off the aviators, there's another one underneath. Just and I talked with Zogby Pauling, because he actually, believe it or not, man, back then, I forget which group he was with back then. I think it might have been before he was as known for the polling. But they pointed this out. They're like, my God, I can't believe you're doing this. Like, what? Like, come on. Number one, we fought this in the 88 cycle, and most people stopped this, And now you're 2 years behind the cycle. You're throwing up a Hail Mary, and this is incredibly racist. Like, what are you doing? And Pence loses by 20 points, and he writes an apology, which is a very kind of, for him, it's kind of a seminal moment in his life and career. It's an essay. Originally, it was going to be a book, believe it or not, actually. And oh man, boy, you got me going now, man. I got all these things I was chasing for so long, and I kind of put them on the back burner. I totally forgot about it. There's a manuscript out there of this. There's more history of Mike Pence that we can find. There really is, and I mean, I tried to find as much as I could, but there's so much more on him, and I hope that he'll reveal more of himself because he is, he, as it turns out, has become an important figure in American history. Um, but what ends up coming of this is he writes an essay, and it's published in August of 1991, I believe, called "Confessions of a Negative Campaigner." And this is, he says, and his aides say, present this as, atonement. He is apologizing, particularly bad, but more generally for the attacks that he ran against his opponent, Phil Sharp. And this kind of creates this persona of like nice guy Mike Pence. And his people say that like this is who he is really. And I think there's a lot of truth. There's a good bit of truth to that. And again, it's always like you always got to go the next step with him in the reporting. You always got to find out just a little bit more. I was doing the reading on this, like he was using it as like a media tour almost to keep his name in the press. And one of the reporters for the Indianapolis Star back then, Pat Traub, said, asked him, he said, well, Mr. Pence, you wrote this essay, you apologized for the campaign. Have you called up Phil Sharp, your opponent, and apologized to him? And Pence says, no, I have not. And Trump's like, well, okay, so why are we talking? Like, should we be talking to him? And he's like, well, it's a confession. It's not an apology. I'm not apologizing to him. I'm just confessing, I'm atoning. And it's like, well, okay. Now they don't talk about that part, Mark Short doesn't go on the Sunday shows and say, well, it wasn't an apology. It was only a confession. I'm not even sure what the difference is myself. You only got so much bandwidth to cover these things.
Yeah, there's some theological stuff that's really deep right there, but the long and the short of it, to get it into one or two sentences, is you can confess all you want to. If you want forgiveness, there's got to be some communication involved. So if you're not communicating, you're not really after forgiveness. You're after something for yourself. I didn't need to study theology for 20 years to know that part of it, but that's the long and the short of that one, I believe.
Well, and you know what, man, this is clutch for understanding Mike Pence, because when you understand the faith and his practice, it's easier to separate out the politics, because in a very real way, he does not let his practice bleed into his faith practice bleed into his practice of politics. And I'll tell you a great little anecdote from his 1988 race. Brian Streeter, who is a senior policy guy was a senior policy guy for him. He's over at American Enterprise Institute now. He was in college at Bible College up in Illinois. I think it was outside Chicago. I can't remember where exactly. Back in the late '80s, and he comes back to Indiana, and he's like 20s or late teens, early 20s, and his family says, "Hey, there's this guy that we know is going to run for Congress. His name's Mike Pence. He's looking for some interns. Maybe you could help him out." And basically becomes his driver on the 1988 campaign. And there are these great moments these two have in the car, just driving through cornfields out near Richmond, Indiana. There's actually, I forget the number of the highway. It's actually it's a famous highway. It's called like the Highway of Vice Presidents almost, because like there's so many vice presidents from Indiana grew up on or near this highway in this stretch from Fort Wayne. Dan Quayle's up in Huntington, Indiana, which is up at Fort Wayne, up near Michigan, down through Richmond, which is like kind of like a parallel to the Ohio border. And they're driving, and they have this moment. Pence is still, he's still figuring things out. He's still figuring out his own religion, his own faith, his own personal feelings on this. And he's talking with Streeter. He's versed in the Bible. Catholics aren't always versed in the Bible. Get like that modicum of separation from it, to say the least. And they're quoting verse to each other. And he has I forget the exact verse. He has it like laminated in his glove compartment, and Ryan Streeter does like a pop quiz on him, asking him to recite the verse, and he does really well with it. Again, that methodical nature of Mike Pence, that disciplined nature. But one of the things that they're debating around this is, how do you practice the faith in the political arena? How do you keep yourself? How do you not lose yourself? I'm really glad you brought this up. I'm really glad you mentioned that, because like it's got me going now. It's got the wheels spinning. It's he's struggling with it, and you can see him trying to figure this out. And I think about that now because of all the struggling you see him doing in politics, and with Trump. How do you do the right thing? When do you run for president? Is running for president the right thing? I mean, I do think that, from all my reporting, people make fun of him for this. I've seen some people say that, Pence is a person who believes he's predestined for the White House. And that, based on my reporting, that is not correct. I have not seen that, and everyone I've talked with around him does not. That's not how he works. He does his check-ins. He does the daily check-ins with God. He says, all right, well, where are we going? And, things change. And now, people close to him will tell you that, yeah, that's how he does this. He listens, right? He listens for what's the answer. I was talking to Dave McIntosh, president of Club for Growth. He was close with Pence in the 90s. We're still close with him. But, Pence actually helped him run for Congress in that congressional seat that Pence did not win in 1988 and 1990. Pence helps run David McIntosh for Congress in 94. And McIntosh does win on the Gingrich wave. We had a great, we were talking about this because McIntosh is an evangelical Christian, very much in the same mold as Mike Pence. I was asking him this. I'm like, how do you know when God is telling you something? How do you know the answer? This is not I'm so wrapped into politics. My questions are usually like, all right, what's the tracking polls? How much money did you bring in? What's the demographics? What's your voter base? Standard, mechanical stuff like that. But, the nice thing about doing this book was, like, I had some more time to just pause and slow down and think about all this. And McIntosh says, it's different for different people, but for a lot of folks, when you know that you have the right answer, and this is the one that God is, directing you towards, you feel like an internal peace. You feel comforted internally. It's different for everybody. And that's kind of what I wonder with Pence. When people say, like, when he says that, like, if we're, am I going to run for president, is, one of his brushaways on that is, well, we're going to keep on checking in with God. Karen and I are going to keep on checking in with God. And I think that's right. I don't think that, I think it serves dual purposes, but, I think that's true of his practice. It's complicated, man. I'm still, I haven't thought about this in a while. Like, I haven't thought about this.
He's checking in with God, but he also has a staff of 20 and a $20 million budget in an office in D.C. right now, which is basically his campaign in waiting. Let's bridge those two things, though, because we're skipping the middle part. How did the guy who and this is why the Republican Party insisted and strong-armed Trump into putting him on the ticket. He's supposed to be the anti-Trump. He's the true blue evangelical. He's the level-headed one. He's the establishment guy. He has the political background from going through things. He has the executive background. That's who that guy's supposed to be. Right. How do you become that guy?
So in 2016, and I think the thing to remember here in particular with that race is that, there are a lot of people who were not wanting to be Donald Trump's vice president. I write about this one example in the book where Bob Corker, former Senate Foreign Relations chairman, goes to meet with Trump, and he doesn't want to take the meeting because he doesn't want to be with Trump.
Right.
And He's just like, come on and do it anyway. He goes up there and he rides up to Trump Tower, meets with Trump, and he basically is very polite and he says, "I'm not interested." And after 30 minutes, Trump alerts him. He says, "Well, the TV camera's downstairs." And he's like, "Oh, okay, don't worry about it. I won't say anything, and I'll respect this conversation." And Trump's like, "Well, no, you just go down there and tell them that I offered it to you." And he's like, "But you didn't offer it to me." He's like, "Yeah, they don't know that. Just tell them that."
Really, just that blunt about it.
I mean, I've never covered anybody like that in my entire life. Hey man, dude, your hair's on fire.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
That's basically right. That's the ethos of that guy. It's really like, anyway. So,
but it's so contradictory to what you painted out as Mike Pence. Not to be hard. I mean, there's no other logical explanation here. This was a calculated decision on the part of Mike Pence. He did a pros and cons, and he decided this is the wagon I'm going to. Now we understand politically he was kind of dead-ended in Indiana for a couple different reasons. Yeah. He made this decision to hitch up with Trump, and everything from that moment till now is dealing with that decision. No, right?
Yes. You know what's fascinating about that is, and I write extensively about that, there's a 2-week stretch in July 2016 where things kind of come together. The Trump campaign plane pops a flat in Indiana, and he gets stuck there, and it kind of forces him into signing up Pence. And it's been out. I put a lot of that out there already, but I will tell you that when in this decision making, the kind of the calculus for Mike and Karen Pence, remember too that they do work as a joint operation. So it's really the two of them. Is that it's the same calculation everyone else is making, the same calculation that Mitch McConnell makes, not Kevin McCarthy, I'm sorry, Paul Ryan, but for other Republican leaders, which is Donald Trump won't be a problem in 4 months because he'll lose. Because, my God, how could this guy win the presidency? Like, everybody's operating under that assumption. And one of our tells on this is that we know about this in particular is because Pence's aides are going out there and telling Republican donors, lining them up for a presidential run in 2020, saying, "Hey, hop on board now, get at the table early, and you'll be there with the possible front runner because Pence will have run on a national ticket with Trump at that point. Theoretically, will not have been too politically damaged." And there does come one key moment of truth. I mean, it's funny to think how quaint this sounds given all that we know now, but think back to October of 2016, the Access Hollywood tape where Trump brags about molesting women and popping Tic Tacs so he can molest women. And and Pence has a decision to make whether to hop off. That's probably where he should have gotten off, the train, but he didn't. And they both decided to stay on there. And it was a political calculation. Obviously they prayed with it too, but it's impossible to avoid the politics of that. And it led them right to here.
And now we have another political calculation. We get to January 6th. We have the riot, the insurrection that was inside of the riot. Let's not parse all that out today. We have whatever happened with Mike Pence in the building that we're still arguing about, I'm not getting in the car, all that kind of mess. But let's just stick to the political calculation part because we know this is fact because it's on camera and we watched him do it. He hung with Trump through everything else up until the point of certifying the election, and that's when he picked his moment to break. So everything between there and there, he was okay with. From the outside observer, and you tell me because you know more about him than I did, That was, I rode this to the absolute last possible moment I could, and then I stepped off. That's how it looks to me as the biographer, as the guy who knows him better than probably anybody else in the media. Is that how it came across to you?
On January 6th, when he wrote that letter, and I remember, I was writing a story. I was in the middle of writing a story about that letter because it sounded like the guy that had been subsumed by Donald Trump. It sounded like the real Mike Pence, the guy that used to study Russell Kirk. That sounded like who he is inside. And I was astounded by this. I was like, wow, where was this guy for the last 4 years? Right or wrong, it's a reflection of character, his character. And then I have C-SPAN on in the background. And I see Niels Lesnevsky from his roll call, CQ roll call. And he's like, well, we're sheltering in place right now, and I can't really tell you where that is because it's a secure location. And I'm kind of like, what the hell, Niels? Like, what are you talking about, man? Like, and then I flip around a little bit more. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, wait a minute, is this real? Like, is any of this real? It's like right after 1 o'clock on January 6th. And I'm like, oh God, like, and I thought, as this all unfolded and as we saw him act on that day, I thought, wow, maybe Mike Pence is finally being himself. And then 3 months later, he's back on the campaign trail, more or less running for president in 2024, hasn't stated it, not talking about January 6th, calculating again. And I am vexed by this. I really am. I'm still vexed by this because, again, this week, sometimes we see him have like little flashes of courage where he'll say, Trump was wrong on January 6th. And that gets everybody, a Twitter about it, and we all read stories about it. But then he goes back to talking about how, great everything was when they were working together, and boy, wasn't January 6th just a, quote, tragic day. And it's a lack of, it doesn't, calling it a tragic day doesn't, would you call Pearl Harbor a tragic day? It just doesn't, it doesn't ring correct. And I see him struggling with it. But again, the flip side of this, which I always come back to, is knowing the political audience and what he's trying to do, which is running for president. That's what it looks like. He's not declared. He's not, he hasn't said it outright. He's doing the actions. You don't hang out in New Hampshire, Iowa, South Carolina, Nevada, unless you got the plan, okay? And in some sense, and this is what the Trump people will tell you, it's almost like a revenge tour. Trump tries to get him killed, or almost gets him killed on January 6th because he's, staging this coup. This is how you do it. It's similar to the Mitch McConnell calculation. You don't beat Trump, and I do think this is correct in the politics of it. If you were on the Republican side, where the vast majority of Republican voters do believe that January 6th was either not a coup or not an insurrection, or a smaller subset believes it's a false flag operation, or whatever. There's no evidence of any of that. How do you address that? If you're running for those votes, how do you do that? I always have to bring myself back to that, because in this moment in politics, we just don't have clarity in that world, in that side of things. It's not. I'm sure there's a Democratic corollary, but I'm still watching this right now. I'm having a hard time finding it.
See, I think I might have been wrong about Pence in this respect, because we always talk about presidential candidates. You got to have a constituency. Doesn't matter your popularity. What's your constituency? Joe Biden shocked everybody because he had the constituency and they showed up, and all of a sudden that race was over in 2 weeks. Yeah. I always said Mike Pence doesn't have a constituency, but as we've talked through this, the biggest constituency that made Donald Trump president was the same ones that we're dealing with January 6th, was the same ones that Mike Pence is thinking about now. It's those evangelical Christians and Republicans and conservatives, and I'm going to use that term broadly. We'll argue it some other day.
For sure.
Just, it is what it is. That group of people, that outsiders who are not them, the news media, the center, the left, the progressives, they can never figure them out and go, how can you believe this X, Y, and Z evangelical Christianity and still support Y, Donald Trump? Doesn't Pence have a consistent that I think that's who he's shooting for? I think that's who he sees himself as is, oh, I did it, but I didn't compromise myself. This is his monologue, not mine. He's saying, this is how we did it. We accomplished some things. There were some bad things. I broke with him when it went too far, because let's be honest, whoever's the next leader of the Republican Party is going to be the guy who takes out Trump, because you got to do that to get that job. That's how that's going to go. He is clearly, purposefully pointing out, we see it in Arizona, we saw it in Georgia, we're seeing it in other places. He is starting that process now. This is another political calculation. So my question to you is, this is unfair, but it's your job because you wrote the book, is which Mike Pence is this? Is this the calculated one? Is this the real Mike Pence? Or is Mike Pence, to use an old wrestling term, has he believed the gimmick because he's been running for president for 6 years, and this is who Mike Pence is now? Does he believe the gimmick? Because I think the cultural Christianity Mike Pence gimmick is just who he is after 6 years of being it.
I'm going to tell you, man, I'm going to tell you a great. Okay, so you ready? I did dissect this in the book, and it's okay. So I had this question too. Why is Pence, who goes to Greenwood Community Church in Indianapolis and 96th Street Community Church? I attended service at 96th Street Church, and I did not hear people, spewing, brimstone and fire and talking about how he, got a drawn quarter gaze because that's an affront to God or whatever. I did not hear that in the service, and I did not hear that from the people that I know that attend service there. That's not that type of church. And everything I could find is that's not that Mike Pence's type of practice. I talk a lot about in the book about premillennial dispensationalism, because that is a thing that feeds into this concept of Trump as a savior character. Even to Pence's people would even talk about him in this sense. When Craig Jacob in January 6th hearing said that he turns to Daniel 6, he brings, reads that. I'm getting tingles right now thinking about it. I get chills, man. It's really, I do. Every time this comes up in the hearings, man, I just get chills. That's Daniel and the Lion. And look who the protagonist is. Pence is a Daniel character to his people. This is how they talk about him. He is a Daniel. He is the slave who is a faithful servant to the tyrant and to God. Again, the dutifulness. Yeah, I know, man. Right? I get chills just thinking about it, because there is a depth to the character, but there's also, there's also a depth to the BS too. That's also part of it. Trump is such a surface level character that it's easy to forget that there's layers to other humans. Like Trump is a pretty transparent person. A lot of other people are not,
See, that's where I draw the line between Trump and Pence. And maybe this is unfair, but this is just me being, a political observer and an analysis and a writer and a host of media. Mm-hmm. Trump is what he is. He's true to who he is, although I disagree with lots of it. I think that's bad. I think it's been bad for the country. He is who he is. That's his natural state. I don't see anywhere where the Mike Pence stuff isn't far more calculated. There's just, and I'm just going off action. There's just no other way to call it. Trump's just doing it the way he thinks he ought to do it. It's just who he is. Pence is navigating around this, and the problem with navigating around it is you have to be calculated. And the more calculated he is, the more apparent he is that the "all shucks, God loves me and Ma just trying to get through life here." Yeah. That last tweet about Trump, that was stone cold. Like he is more calculated by the day and by the tweet. This is just me observing it as mostly unbiased because I didn't vote for him. Mm-hmm. I think he's getting more and more calculated because this is learned experience for him over the last few years.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. It's a couple of things on that. He is calculating, and it's this whatever pre-campaign for president in 2024 that we're watching right now. and most people do expect him to run for president, is calculated. He's picking in his shots. He did, Brian Kemp showdown in Georgia, and he won that one. He won that proxy battle. Got another one coming up with Wisconsin. He is incredibly calculating there. And it does make me wonder, I still wonder about, who is the core of this guy. There's certain things that, very much, very obvious about is the core of him. Pro-life, anti-abortion, 100%. And there's a good barometer for that, which is you look at the rest of the hypothetical to the prospective 2024 field, and they're running away from it. Donald Trump, who, should get the political credit for this, for putting 3 justices on there, or arguably McConnell should, anyway, but he's running from it. He's saying we shouldn't be talking about this. Cotton, Pompeo, Haley, all the rest of them, they're kind of running away from this. Pence is running into it. He's running on it. He's holding that down. That might just be a life raft, but he's doing it. So, and I do think that is part of his core. He has been consistent on that. But the other stuff, I don't know. I still struggle with this. After 11 years of following this guy, like I don't always know who he is. Is he the faithful servant under fire, trying to lead his people through tumultuous times? Another allegory, they say, another anecdote is Joseph and the Pharaoh. And Pence is Joseph in that case. Is it like that? I don't know. That's certainly one way of viewing it. The flip side of that also, or a secular, way of stating that would be adult in the room. And I think you have seen some adults in the room, or people attempt to be adults in the room. But then you also get Rudy Giuliani in the room. So obviously the adults were not able to keep out the lunatics. And anyone telling me about, changing votes via Italian satellites redirecting through Chinese thermostats is not
No.
sane. Sorry.
No, they're not. You're fine. Tom LoBianco, we really appreciated the time. We're going to do this again. I'm going to have you back as soon as you can arrange it, because we got a lot more to talk about this, and he's running for president, so we're going to be talking about it for 2 years. The book is Piety and Power. We're linking to it in the show notes. Make sure you buy it and read the whole thing. Let folks know where they can follow you until we see you again back on Hertel.
Yeah, buddy. Tom LoBianco. I'll spell it. So I got to say it. LoBianco. Tom LoBianco. You find me on Twitter. Tom LoBianco at Gmail. See LoBianco at Yahoo Inc. I'm over at Yahoo News. All my stuff over there. And yeah, man. Wherever good quality podcasts are aired around this country.
Yeah, we're gonna definitely have you back. You quoted Daniel 6. I'm a Daniel 3 guy. Y'all can figure that out on your own some other time.
Oh, wow, man.
Right down to the Twitter handle. Everybody always asks me where that's from. That's Daniel 3. We thank you so much for your time today. We'll do it again real soon. Thank you, sir. We'll talk soon.
Thank you, Andrew.
All the music on Hertel is provided under a Creative Content license from monstercat.com.